Well, good evening, and welcome once again to Letchworth Cable Access. I'm Kyle Adams-Zach, and tonight we're fortunate to have as our guests Jane and Jane Emborsky, who are here to tell us about another one of their marathon bicycle tours that they've taken. I remember you coming in here a year or so ago, or a couple of years ago, about your cross-country trip. And I still am amazed that anybody could do that. And now you have another bicycle tour you're going to tell us about and show us some photographs that you took along the way. Is tour the right word I want to use to describe what you've done, or
yes,
or is it?
Yes, definitely. It's a tour.
Yeah.
We generally ride day to day. Take our time as best we can. Like to see the sights and the scenery. So it's not a race, nothing like that. This is just, get on the road and see what you can see. So.
How many of these have you taken over the years? These multi-night marathon.
More than a dozen.
Yeah.
Definitely.
We rode many years in Vermont for week-long trips, and gosh, we've just been all over the country.
Now, how do you prepare for a long... this trip that you're going to tell us about took you 10 days, right?
Correct.
How do you prepare for a trip like that? To me, it seems like... well, I guess if it was me, I'd be exhausted at the end of the first day.
You ride every day.
You train for it.
Yeah, you actually do train for it. If not every day, it's certainly multiple times during the week, and expanding how long you ride. They say that you can ride twice the distance of your of your longest ride. So if I got up to 25 miles, I know that in a day I could probably easily ride 50. And that's kind of just a rule of thumb.
Now, when you go on these overnight trips, as luggage, is it what you can carry on your back, or do you make some kind of arrangement? Or
it varies with the trip. On this particular trip, we started out with all of our clothing needs on our bikes, all of our personal care items on our bikes. But we were riding from bed and breakfast to bed and breakfast, so that made it a little easier. We weren't carrying tenting gear and camping things. We were just carrying personal gear.
So how much weight is ideal to carry along on the bicycle?
I was carrying about 18 to 20 pounds, and you were,
we were
more in the...
Probably 25. Once you get past 25, it's pretty heavy. So, although there are people that ride with more gear that get up to 50 and 60 pounds sometimes. So that's a lot. That's a lot.
I assume you have to carefully pack it to balance it?
Yes, you don't want to be leaning and find out you mispacked.
How do you carry the luggage on? A backpack or like a saddlebag?
They're on racks that look like a saddlebag. They're called panniers.
Oh, okay.
And you learn to stuff as much as you can, and you learn to go pretty light. You learn that you take one of this and not two, and you learn to make do.
And you learn that you're going to see each other in the same outfit every day for the next 10 days, because really after you're showered and cleaned up, you're only up for a few hours. So you don't need a lot of casual non-riding clothes, and you don't carry anything that's not essential.
Well, here, let's look at your slides that you have. First off, where did this tour take place? Where did you travel?
The tour took place. A friend of ours that we had ridden with in the past recommended this. The Natchez Trace is basically an old Indian path that was developed into a road and then eventually became a national park. And that park runs from Natchez, Mississippi, which is in the southwest part of Mississippi, all the way up diagonally across Mississippi into Alabama, and then it ends essentially just south of Nashville, Tennessee.
And how many miles was that?
The park itself the parkway is 444 miles from one end to the other.
Yeah.
And it's very impressive. It's just a beautiful kind of flat to rolling scenery. The only downside for people to relate to is that it's like riding in Letchworth Park. So you don't find a gas station in Letchworth Park. You don't find a restaurant usually. And so the facilities are very primitive, or they're very few or far between, or you have to get off the parkway. So that's why we rode more miles than actually 444.
All right, well, let's see some of the photos that you have to share with us from the Natchez Trace.
The first one is just a crude map that shows the trace itself, and just the fact that it's a link between Nashville and Natchez, Mississippi.
So you're traveling southwest.
We were traveling from the south to the northeast is what we did.
North,
we
from
rode
Natchez
it,
to
we rode it
Nashville.
backwards.
I'm sorry.
Yep. And how this developed from besides as an Indian path is that people in the north and northeast would grow crops, goods, what have you, and they would float it down the Mississippi River. They would get to Nashville. They would sell their goods, and then they would also sell their boat and walk home. And it's pretty impressive that people would do this. They would walk all the way back to Ohio and Kentucky and what have you. And so we were retracing those steps. We were going exactly the way that a person would do this who was an old Ohioan and had gone downriver. So that's what it looks like. We had to get the Natchez. And so what you're looking at is a rental truck. And the problem we had, or the problem that I had being one of the primary planners, is that I could not get a one-way rental from Nashville to Natchez. It just didn't exist unless I rented a big truck. So we wound up renting this big truck outside of Nashville, Tennessee, and we drove to Natchez where we dropped it off because that's where we were going to start riding.
We left our van in Nashville
Right.
at a hotel, and then picked up the rental, drove to Natchez, dropped the rental truck off, and then the next day started riding back.
Okay, so with the rental truck, you use that to carry the bicycles
bikes.
to Natchez.
Correct.
And the next picture you're going to see is we didn't really have
An
a whole lot of
empty truck.
stuff. It's very much an empty truck.
Yeah.
There are actually 3 bikes in there and our gear, and that's Jane on the left and my brother Rod, who started the trip with us. And so we have everything packed in there, and we're just going to, tootle on down the road for 500 miles with our bikes in the back of this truck. But sadly, they wouldn't rent me anything else. So
it got the job done.
It got
It
the
did.
job done. It was quite an event to go 500 miles. Also, the same time we picked up the truck, we met this gentleman in the hotel who, his name is Tom Knoll. He was 79, going on 80 years old. He was an original Ironman. He got together with 11 of his buddies in 1978, and they started the Ironman competition. He finished 6th in that, and he has run cross-country every way you can think of.
Just to fill us in, what is the Ironman competition?
The Ironman is a swim, bicycle, run competition. It is the most arduous competition out there. It makes what we do look like child's play.
So he was in the first one.
He was in the very first one.
6th place.
And he got 6th place. And the day we met him in Natchez, Mississippi, he had started running from New Orleans on Memorial Day, and his intention was to run to International Falls, Minnesota. Now, this is a guy who is almost 80 years old. He runs about 30 miles a day, takes some breaks, obviously. So we were just kind of blown away by him.
Yeah.
It was really amazing just to meet him. This was like history, It's like almost meeting George Washington. And so here we are. This is our first day. We had dropped the truck off. We got our bikes. It's Jane and myself in front of the Natchez Trace Parkway sign.
And
We're
I
at
see
the
you
southern.
have your helmets on.
We got our helmets on.
We
Yes,
never ride without a helmet.
we try to be very safe riders. We also have camelbacks, which we're wearing, which are extra water bladders, basically, and we have water bottles and things like that. So we're all set and ready to go, and we're just happy, and it's sunny and warm, and we're ready to go. In the next picture, you see this is my brother riding away from us, and you can see that it looks very much like Letchworth Park.
Yes, very lonely.
There's not a lot of shoulder there, so it's not exactly bicycle friendly, but there's not a lot of traffic. They don't allow trucks on there. You get motorcycles, cars, that sort of thing, but you don't get big SUVs. Well, maybe SUVs, but you don't get big campers, things like that.
Well, there were some RVs on it,
Yeah.
but and there's also a speed limit, so
Yeah.
that kept it a little bit
Yeah, I think it's 50 miles
more
an hour.
user friendly.
Yeah.
Is this a popular path for bike tours?
Yes, this is very
Actually,
popular.
it is.
Very popular. People do parts of this, or they try and do all of it, and I guess in the fall it's just absolutely packed with not only bicyclists but also motorcyclists, because it's just a great thing to do. And being a national park, there's no charge for going in. We felt perfectly safe being in there. It was a pretty amazing trip, I think, in terms of what we saw.
It was gorgeous.
So, one of the things that I really liked about the park is the next picture. What you're seeing is there was a lot of signage, and so I would take pictures of that just to kind of remind me what we were looking at. So we would be riding along, and we would see a sign that said Bowling Creek, as this did, and we would stop and read it. And sometimes we would go off the path and actually investigate what it had to say.
And do you remember what the story is of Bowling Creek?
No, not if I read the picture, then I'll be able to remember that. But no, Bowling Creek is just it's still there, and I can't. I have no idea what they were doing with that.
That's a nice project for the folks at home to look it up.
To look up Bowling Creek. Okay. This is our first night. We spent in a bed and breakfast just off the Trace, only a mile off the Trace, and it was called Buffalo Spirit Ranch. And the two people that run this bed and breakfast, a husband and wife, were just really phenomenal people. And Jane, I think you can talk a little bit about.
They run a horse rescue, and had, I think at that time, 18 horses on the property. She is an accomplished artist, multimedia artist. Tooled leather work that was just exquisite.
Yeah.
Pen and ink drawings. She worked with fabric as well. And you can see in the picture that there's a lot of tanned hides and a lot of their artwork throughout the house. She also worked with pottery. She was amazing.
Yeah.
And he was a very accomplished photographer.
Yeah. And because there was nothing around here. I mean, we were 60 miles away from Natchez. There was no place to get anything to eat. They invited us for dinner. So that wasn't part of the deal. That wasn't like an extra charge or anything like that. They just said, why don't you stay with us and have dinner with us, which is what we did. We thought that was really phenomenal.
Well, that was nice of them. What would you have done had they not invited?
It probably would have been granola bars or fruit and nuts or something like that.
You were lucky.
We tend to take a little bit of food with us.
And the other option is, after you're cleaned up, you get back on your bicycle and you ride someplace to a restaurant or whatever. But it would have been a considerable distance from this particular bed and breakfast.
Well, that was considerate of them to treat you like that.
So now we're the next day we're back onto the Trace, and you can see we're about 60 miles away from Natchez, and we're heading to Jackson, Mississippi is where we're headed. So you can take a look at that. And again, another shot of my brother, who by this time was starting to suffer a little bit. He's a rather large person, and the heat was quite intense. The humidity was very high.
Yeah.
Although they were the people in Mississippi were saying, "Oh, it's nice and cool." We found it to be very, very warm.
They wanted to know if we were enjoying their cool Mississippi weather.
So he's starting to struggle a little bit, and later on he's going to wind up not having to abandon.
Do you remember what the temperature was that they considered cool?
Anything below 90.
It was 85.
Yeah.
85.
Anything below 90 was cool. Yeah, so it was kind of neat. And, again, being a park, then bordered by private land, you would see all sorts of animals, cows, birds. There were things that we,
And what do we have here?
Those are egrets, those white birds.
Uh-huh.
I believe they're egrets anyways. And they're looking for whatever is around that cow. So it might be grain, it might be insects, what have you. But when you see the cows, you almost always see those white birds. And that's kind of interesting. We actually saw some park people mowing some of the grass next to the trace, and a woman was coming and loading it into her pickup truck. And so I stopped and asked her what she was doing, and she said that she takes it home and feeds it to her cows. So it was kind of nice that everybody benefited from that. This is a heron rookery that we passed, and up in the trees, especially on the right and the right center, you can see nests, and there's a couple herons up there, and they were kind of noisy, and they didn't like us being around a whole lot. And but we managed pretty well with them. We didn't disturb too many animals.
Those are your rides.
These are our rides.
Your sweet rides.
These
Yes,
are our
they
sweet
are.
rides. We were riding, because of the way we were doing it, with just rear panniers, and Jane had a handlebar bag. Many people that ride bikes also have front panniers, but we had, because these are basically mountain bikes, all of our gear is behind us, and so we wound up carrying our water and what have you that way.
So your saddlebags or your panniers,
Yes,
you're calling
that's
it,
our panniers.
is that what's draped over the back wheel?
Correct. What's over the back wheel. And you stuff as much stuff that you can get in there. Like a couple changes of clothes. You'd be surprised. We get pretty good at it.
If you're just tuning in, our guests tonight are Jane and Jane Emborsky, and they're telling us about their trip that they took in the summer, right, of 2012
Yes.
over the Natchez Trace. So what do we have next?
Next is a fun thing. It shows broken pavement and barrels, but it's the reason why it's a fun thing to me is that bicycles can take you places that cars can't go, and that makes it interesting. So they had this was a blocked off section of the Natchez Trace, and so there were no cars on here. But because there was only one little damaged area, we could actually ride our bikes through it. So we had a 10-mile stretch of parkway that there were absolutely no cars, no traffic, no motorcycles, nothing but bicycles.
Just us. We had our own private bike path.
Yep.
Yeah.
It was terrific. So this is our second day. We stayed at a bed and breakfast called Willowbrook Farm, which was quite a ways off the trace. It was like I think it was almost 10 miles off the trace.
Now, this is day 2. What state are you in still?
We're still in Mississippi.
Still in Mississippi.
Yep, we're still in Mississippi. And the big building on the left is a horse barn.
Uh-huh.
And we slept over the horse barn.
Were
In
there
a very nice apartment
Yeah,
where you didn't hear the horses, you didn't smell the horses, thankfully,
yeah.
and it was a very nice situation for us.
Oh, nice.
And we found out that in the South, or at least in Mississippi and the places where we stayed, bed and breakfast doesn't exactly mean what bread and breakfast means to me up here in New York State. Down there, bed and breakfast means they give you a bed and you make your breakfast. So they provide you with the food, and that's exactly what our host did there. Is she had food for us, and we cooked not only dinner the one night but also breakfast the next morning. So it was a little different than what you normally would see.
Did you know this up front? Or?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, we knew this. We had a person who actually I used as a resource who has a business just booking the bed and breakfasts. So we went through him. There was no cost to us, and he laid it all out for us. Again, we're taking a break here, and the reason why we're taking a break is we basically have run out of energy, and I wound up having to go into a little town off the Trace, and I actually went by a prison work crew. They were in green and white striped pants and shirts, and I rode a little faster when I did that. But Jane and my brother are just sitting there waiting for me to get back, I think, at some point.
I was studying the map, and Rodney was just unhappy.
Yeah, it wasn't going well for him. This picture shows my bike parked, and we're ready to get off the Trace for the day. And we're in a town. We're going to stay in a town called Kosciuszko, Mississippi, whose, as far as I can tell, the only claim to fame is it is the birthplace of Oprah Winfrey. Okay, who recently had a chat with Lance Armstrong, of course. So it was very nice. We wound up we stayed in a motel because there were no bed and breakfasts in the area. So we wound up staying in Oprah Winfrey's house, basically.
No.
No. The next day we had a very short day planned. We had gone 2 very long days, and the next day we had a very short day planned. And so we're riding into a town called French Camp, and we're going to stay there at night. And we only had to ride 20 miles. And French Camp was just a gorgeous place.
Now, what's that along parallel to the road? Is that split rail fence?
That's split rail fence because there's horses back in there. There's 2 things my wife loves more than bicycling, and of course myself. It's horses and Indians, and she just got her fill of it on this trip.
There's
I'm going to tell you.
so much Native American history along the Trace, as well as a lot of beautiful horses. It was perfect.
Yeah. Very good.
But French Camp is a historic village that I would say is a very small version of the Genesee Country Museum, with a lot of historic buildings that have been moved there, and a lot of antique farm equipment and that have in various states of repair or disrepair. So it looked like very much a work in progress still.
Yeah. This was the carriage house that we stayed in, and to the left by the sliding glass doors, there's actually a carriage in there, and I could not get a good picture of it, but the carriage was actually ridden in by a native Indian chief from French Camp in Mississippi to Washington, D.C. to sign a treaty, and then he rode home in that. And it was just amazing that someone would actually do that. There, with no roads, what have you, being available to them, that they could actually do that. Because it was a 20-mile day, we had a lot more time on our hands. So one of the things we did was walk around and see the sights. And this is what's in this picture. Is Jane and my brother are walking on. They had these walk paths, these boarded walkways, and we would just walk from house to house and look in them. And take a look at some of the stuff that was available. The next picture shows Jane in front of an old log cabin that they had actually found someplace and dismantled and put it back up.
I was going to say, I thought that was a photo of the post office down at Silver Lake.
In
a different life.
May very well be. And then the next day we're up and we're ready to go, and so there's Jane on the boardwalk. We'd had breakfast at this point in time, and a woman who cooked for us, her name was Sissy, and probably the only food I really don't like to eat are grits. I just never really acquired the taste for grits, and she assured me when I met her the night before that I would love her grits, and she's right, and she gave us her recipe, and we've made it several times, and it's really good stuff.
Well, what was it about her grits that made the difference as far as you were concerned?
She cooks them for hours.
Yes, long, slow
It's not
cook.
the 20-minute variety that we're used to in the grocery store or that the container in the grocery store tells you. She definitely... She started the grits at 5 o'clock in the morning for an 8 o'clock breakfast.
Yeah.
And just let them cook
And
long
cook
and slow.
Cook. And it was very good.
Yeah.
It was very good. So we're on the road again, and one of the things they have on the parkways, they have mile markers. So here's my bike parked against mile marker number 200.
So you're almost halfway there.
We're almost halfway there, which is a good thing. When you're almost halfway there, it
almost
really works
halfway
out.
there, and
Yeah.
this is day what?
This would be day 4 going on 5.
Uh-huh.
So, yep, we're almost halfway there.
So you were on schedule?
We were definitely on schedule. That was the unfortunate thing, is we had to keep the schedule because we had reservations in the bed and breakfast.
Yes,
so
yes.
that's different than going camping on your own. One of the things Sissy had told us about is when we were going to ride away from French Camp was that we would see tornado damage. And in April of 2011, as you can see in this picture, they put a sign up there. A number of tornadoes came ripping through. I think they set a record for the number of tornadoes in one day in the United States in April of 2011. And I don't have any pictures that really do justice to the damage, but it just looked like someone took a buzzsaw and just chopped the trees at a certain level.
So we'd be riding through basically a forest, and then you were in just open sky country.
Yeah.
It was just devastating.
It was devastating.
It was unbelievable. The local high school still has not been rebuilt.
No kidding.
Yeah. And then we came into Houston, Mississippi, and stayed in a bed and breakfast. And this is a marker for the Confederate States of America, and it's in honor of those people who served in the War for Southern Independence. It definitely let us know that we were in the South, and it was a very hot day and a very long day. My brother was struggling, so when we hit the bed and breakfast, we said, the woman asked us if there was anything she could do for us, and I said, yes, if you could just point us to a place where I could buy some beer, I would be very happy. And she says,
boy, were we disappointed.
Unfortunately, you are in a dry town, a dry county. And so I said, you got to be kidding me. And she said, I tell you what, I have 4 beers in the refrigerator downstairs. I'm willing to give them to you. So the next picture is a picture of one of those beers that she gave up for us.
Land Shark
Lager. It didn't make any difference what it was. It was cold and it was great.
Tasted good, huh?
Yeah, it tasted very good.
It certainly did.
And we found out very quickly that you could walk across the street and you could go from a dry town into one that wasn't, and it was pretty amazing. And this is an Indian mound.
A burial mound?
Yes.
Yes, I believe it's a burial mound. And so I just parked the bike there for some perspective. You can see how high it is.
It was actually
about how high?
a small one.
Yeah, this one's probably about 10 feet.
Yeah.
I'm in terms of that, and they were very well marked for the most part, and very well cared for.
All along the trace, the historical items were well marked and well recorded.
Well, here we have a detail of your backpack, or what do you call it? I want to call it
Pannier.
a saddlebag.
Pannier, saddlebag, that's okay. I think pannier is a European term anyways. One of the things that people often ask us is, how do you take care of things like laundry and stuff like that?
Yes, how do you?
Well, you can wash it out, but sometimes there's no dryer. So what you have here is a built-in natural dryer. You just take your shorts and put them on the back of your pannier and hope that the sun and the wind takes care of what's going on. And so that's what that's a picture of. It's one of the practical aspects of having to tour. This is a picture of what they call the sunken trace. And the ground was fairly soft. It was soil called tuff, I believe. And what that is that's about 6 to 8 feet down, and that is worn down by people walking it.
Really?
Yes.
You can stand in there, and it's taller than my head. I'm 6'1",
Yeah.
and it's just from people literally walking that path over and over again.
Over the centuries.
Yes, they call the Natchez Trace America's first superhighway, and so it was nice to see that. This is Far Mounds, and I can tell you what Far Mounds is. I couldn't tell you what Bowling Creek was, but I can tell you what Far Mounds. Far Mounds was this phenomenal Indian burial ground that they had preserved, luckily. And so there were a number of them present, number of mounds present. And so Jane and I spent quite a bit of time kind of perusing through here. And the reason we were able to do this is at our previous stopover, the person who was the bed and breakfast guy realized that my brother was really hurting. and not doing very well. And so he offered to drive my brother to the next stop, which was 40 miles up the road.
And that transpired after we discovered we could not get a rental car for him to drive himself to the next one. So
we were
thankfully this man took pity on
Yeah.
us.
You met some nice people along
We
the way.
did.
Yeah,
We
that's the
truly
one thing
did.
about bicycling, I think, more than anything, is you really do meet a lot of nice people. So Jane and I are basically on our own at this point in time. My brother's been transported to the next bed and breakfast.
And the rationale was, if nothing else, he would have a day of rest
Yeah.
before he had to ride out again.
Get back on.
Fortunately for Rod,
Yeah, things worked out really well.
he was able to connect and get a rental car the next day.
Yeah.
Then he drove to Nashville, picked up our van, came back and met us, and finished the tour as our support vehicle.
Yeah, so those things worked out. This is another large burial mound that we saw along the way.
Now, who was be buried in there? Was it a general like cemetery, or would
I
it be
don't- I
one
don't-
person, or?
As I understand it, there would be multiple burials, through time in that complex.
There would also be work zones, so they would come back there over and over again. Sometimes, not all the mounds were burial mounds, so sometimes there would be just places. Ceremonial places. Pottery would be in there, things like that. You would find that. We are now done with Mississippi. So that's Jane, obviously, and we are going to enter and spend a very small amount of time in the state of Alabama. Actually, we're only going to be in there one day total. And so we ride into Alabama, we stay overnight, and then we ride out the next day, basically. So the Trace only cuts a little corner of Alabama. So
Now, how was the temperature at this point?
it was
the
still
same?
90. Yeah, it was still very, very hot. I think if you look closely on the back there of Jane's bike, you'll see that she is actually carrying extra water bottles. And so what we would do at night is Jane would take the water bottles, 3/4 fill them, and then freeze them, put them in a freezer, and then we would have fresh water for the next day, along with all our other
Extra water, because there weren't always enough places to get fresh water
Right.
without having to ride an extra 5 miles, and nobody at that point wanted to ride an extra 5 miles.
Well, here's somebody looks comfortable.
Yes, he's very comfortable and he's very happy because he's in the cottage just outside of Muscle Shoals,
This is
Alabama.
your brother.
And yes, my brother.
And he knows he has a rental car.
He's got a rental car. And he knows everything is going to be good. So the plan at this point is that Rod, my brother, will pick up the rental car the next day, drive up to Nashville, exchange the rental car, get our van, and then come back and meet us. So that's what's going to happen. He's not going to go home.
So
He's going to stay with us.
So that following morning, Gene and I rode out of the bed and breakfast by ourselves, and the owner of the bed and breakfast arranged for a neighbor to take Rodney into Muscle Shoals or wherever it was that he picked up the rental car. So there were a lot of people that stepped up and looked after.
Nice.
After us.
This is a picture of the river that was right behind the cottage where we were staying. It was
Is this sunset or sunrise?
Sun going down.
Yeah.
And
Beautiful.
so it's gorgeous.
What's
gorgeous.
that in the middle of the river? An island, or is
Yes.
Yes,
it
there are
boats?
several. And fishermen were all over the place. They really like that.
And what were they fishing for? Catfish?
Bass, I think.
Bass.
They have striped bass down there. They have all kinds of bass. When we got to the cottage where we stayed in Alabama, the woman there said, you really should go to this restaurant. This restaurant is called the Rattlesnake Saloon, and I've heard it's really good, and you need to go there. You should go there. And I said, okay, fine. How far is the restaurant away from here? And she goes, it's about 10, 12 miles. I said, well, we're not going to go. I'm not riding my bike another 10, 12 miles, plus it's going to be dark. So the woman says, don't worry about it, take my car. She says, just take my car. And which is the second time that this has happened to us. And she gave us her Lexus SUV. And we drove, and we found this place. And I really am sorry that it's not a very good picture, but what you're looking at is it's about 50 to 100 feet down in a ravine, and this is
It'd be like going down into the Letchworth Gorge.
Gorge, exactly.
And there's a rock shelter, which is basically a cave.
Yeah.
And they have a restaurant, bar, and they were doing karaoke that night.
So the big bright light that you can see on the right
this
is
ancient Indian rock shelter,
shining on these people that are drinking beer and doing karaoke.
And they serve rattlesnake? Or?
No.
But very good burgers.
They had very good burgers.
And lots of cold beer. Yeah. Thankfully, no dry county there.
As I mentioned, we didn't spend a long time in Alabama, so we're in and out. So this is the state line that you're seeing between Alabama and Tennessee, and we're going to end up obviously in Tennessee. And so we cross another state. In this picture, there's a lot. It's very busy. There's a lot of different things happening. Clearly, my brother's back. He's not in riding gear. If you look carefully at Jane's bike, you'll see on the back that her saddlebags or panniers are not there.
Yeah.
And that's because he's gone up, picked up our van, came back and met us, and we threw our gear, all our excess gear, into the van. So we are much faster now, and everybody is much happier. So we're riding along, doing really well. Again, a picture of unfortunately of the backside, but a picture of my brother and Jane, and we are at the Meriwether Lewis Memorial. This is the Lewis of Lewis and Clark,
right.
And this is the place where he died. And he's actually buried under that big stone obelisk there. He was murdered one night, as the story goes, in a tavern located very close to the site here. And so Jane and my brother Rod are looking at markers that are actually in the ground. But Meriwether Lewis.
Wow.
It was quite a big park, and it was pretty amazing to see this. I say that this is probably one of my best pictures I ever took. Jane leaning over the 400-mile marker. We only have 44 miles left to go,
all right.
And we're going to be done. So
this is day 9 or 10?
This is day 9. 9 at this point, because we're actually going to stay over one more night and end up the next day. And here is my brother with the van parked on the side of the road, and he's got water and food and what have you, and so he became our support vehicle. And because he was there, what we actually did this next to last day, is we rode a little farther than what we normally would, and then we knew the next day he could bring us there, and we would just start the ride from that point on a parkway, and it turned out to be very good for us.
And then our last day was shorter.
And
therefore easier.
So he's being our support vehicle, our SAG vehicle. And we wound up staying, again, out in the middle of nowhere in a bed and breakfast called Ridgetop, which was very appropriate because it was on top of a ridge in a mountain in the middle of nowhere, Tennessee.
It certainly was.
And I don't know that we would have found it had we had to ride to it. But this is actually a slave cabin that the owners purchased and dismantled and brought to their property and put it together, and then they made some improvements, obviously. And that was our cottage for the night. And I was not very happy because it was very warm out, and they just had this small fan in there, and I thought, I'm just not going to do very well. And after about 10 or 15 minutes, Jane discovered where the air conditioner was, and things were much nicer. And you have a little story about being there too, don't you? In terms of that.
It was a very gorgeous landscaped area. They had a beautiful garden, and I had never seen a turkey chick before. I've seen wild turkeys around here quite frequently, but I'd never seen a chick. And we saw several little clutches of them, 8 or 10 turkeys with their mom, and that just thrilled me. And then the property, we had a lot of woods, and we saw deer. It was just loaded with wildlife, and it was just a gorgeous, and wild flowers. It was just a gorgeous place. A wonderful ending to the trip.
Yep. And so we finish our ride back where we had stayed overnight and picked up the rental truck and left our van and everything. So here we are. It's mile marker 444, and we are in our van. All three of us, all three of our bikes, all of our luggage, and everything, and we are happy. It was a great trip. It was 10 days. We wound up riding, I think, as I mentioned earlier, 474 miles because we had to go off to Trace several times and then come back on. But it was just a terrific trip. And
Well, it sounds it. Now, were you exhausted at the end of it, or was it just, you were paced between? It was paced so that it was just.
I think that
nothing.
for Gene and I, it was well paced, and we were tired, but not extended.
sick.
Not exhausted by any means. Rodney had recovered at that point. It's about when he stopped riding, he was really at his max. He could not have continued. So made it doubly important that people stepped up and looked after us.
Right.
So I think we felt, there's always a sense of adventure. You don't know, when you step out like this, what you're going to find. And that's obviously part of the fun. But I think we were, at this point in the van, we were relieved that we made it through and everything worked out really well. And I think either one of us would go back again.
Yeah.
And do the Natchez Trace because it's just a very pretty place.
And as we talked about it later, Rodney and Gene and I, discussed what went wrong, and Rodney admitted that he hadn't trained quite as diligently as he has with rides that we've taken together in the past, and that put him into some, serious trouble. But, other than that, everything went smoothly.
So you got to your end stop, and then what? You drove the van back to New York, or?
Yes, not all in one day though. Okay. What we actually did, we still had reservations in a hotel in the south of Nashville, and we were intending on staying there. But we got back to the van because of Rod being support for us. We got back to the van so quickly that we made a decision to push on and drive farther north. Which was unfortunate because we got stuck in this huge traffic jam, and we spent literally hours on the interstate, just stuck. Had we just gone to our hotel, we would have been much more restful. But it worked out very well. We stayed another night in a hotel, and then we came back to Jamestown, which is where my brother lives, and stayed over. And then the next day we came home.
Yeah.
He has since done some serious weight loss and some good training, and he's riding much better, and so we're hopeful we're going to ride again.
Yes, he's still willing to ride
willing
with
to go with
us.
We
We
didn't
didn't kill him.
Well, now, do you have any future trips planned along these lines?
Yes, as a matter of we always have a couple trips. This May, we're going to Santa Fe and ride with our friend Herb, who we rode cross-country with, who's now 81 years old. And we're planning on doing the Santa Fe Century, which is a one-day ride of 102 miles about. He'll do the whole thing. And we have several other friends that we met when we rode cross-country, and they're planning on coming in. So it's kind of a reunion for us, which is really neat. The other thing that we're going to do is Herb has promised us that he's going to come east. And so in July, there's a ride that starts in Cortland, and they do a big loop. It's called the Bonton Roulette. And it's a bike camping tour. And so what you do is you ride X number of miles, 30, 40 miles, however, in a day, and then you sleep in a tent at night. And they carry your gear, so we won't have to carry our gear. We can just ride our road bikes. And so that lasts about 6 days. That
Now,
starts.
the Bonton Roulette goes, through upstate New York?
It goes right around the Finger Lakes. And so they hit just about every winery you can think of. So Herb will be really thrilled. So that's our 2 trips for this year. I don't think we're going to be able to squeeze in the third one this year, but we would still, we're still open. There's still lots of miles out there that we want to ride our bike. Okay, probably do the Tour of the Prairie, and we'll do the Thursday night rides here. and continue doing those things in the community and promoting bicycling as best we can.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you for coming in tonight. Our guests were Jane and Jane Emborsky, and they told us about their 10-day bicycle trip along the Natchez Trace,
Yes,
which went from Mississippi to Tennessee. And again, we want to thank you for coming in tonight.
It's our pleasure.
Yes,
And
indeed.
I'm Kyle Adamczak, and as always, we thank you for watching us. Good night.